I caught the Central Line train at Lawton Station, as I did every morning after driving here from Abbess Roding. In that area of northern Essex, there are several villages with a suffix Roding. They take their name from the River Roding, which rises in the East Anglian Heights, then flows south, meandering through the county. Along the way, its name changes to Bark Creek before the river adds its waters to the Thames. The Roding was sometimes pronounced Ruthing, a name dating back to Anglo-Saxon times when the river was called Hrodinga. Back then, the first Englishmen pronounced the letter D as TH. It is amazing how on this island we live every day side by side with reminders of more than 1,000 years of history. I found it easier to catch the train at Lawton as there was more parking there than at Ongar. The service between Ongar and Epping stations was suspended in 1994, probably because, like me, few people used the line. The train ride became a time for reflection. My subconscious marked the stations without having to read their names. I drove this route so often that looking out the window was no longer interesting. It was the same thing every day. The view from the window shows the rear sides of the terraced houses built after the line was extended into Essex, a ribbon of humanity following the railway to green fields, escaping the dirt and grime of London. The once busy goods yards became clogged parking lots at stations along the line, as it was now commuter territory. My ears recognized the knock-knock connections to other lines radiating throughout the great suburban world that fed me and thousands of others into the maw of commercial London. The whine of electric motors as the train accelerated, then the roar and pressure on the eardrums as the train plunged into tunnels barely wider than the cars themselves. This meant that we had just left Leighton. A slight climb brought us back into the light at Stratford Station, followed by another dive into the tunnel. All this did not distract me from the morning newspaper, but was deposited in the subconscious so much that I always knew where I was without looking out the window. I only noticed what was happening at Mile End Station, where hundreds of passengers were exiting the Central Line onto the District Line platform, and hundreds more were filling the vacancies, leaving only the option of standing. Next stop was Bethnal Green, where I got off. The carriage was so crowded that I began to make my way to the doors immediately after the train left Mile End. I had to squeeze through a crowd of bodies, squeezed by other bodies in a crowded carriage. In the crowded space, I involuntarily touched other people's breasts, hips, backs, and my briefcase clung to skirts and legs, preventing me from moving forward. Finally, I reached the doors just as the train creaked to a stop. The doors hissed open, and I pushed my way out, fighting the influx of passengers boarding the train. It was a real pleasure to leave the station and breathe in the fresh air. As the world's oldest underground transport system, the London Underground suffers from many problems. The most obvious of these is the lack of air conditioning, but the Victorian and Edwardian engineers who built the tube could not have foreseen such amenities, or that so many people will use the system. It was not far from my office on Old Street, and I enjoyed the short but quick walk. A door to the side of the newsstand led to a steep staircase. The Punjabi immigrant who owned the store waved cheerfully at me, pretending to check the time on his watch. This was his comment on my constant punctuality. Another door at the top of the stairs led to the lobby of my office. There were two rooms. The large one, with my desk and filing cabinets, served as a work office, and the smaller one turned into a kitchen with a corner bathroom. Not too luxurious, but for me, who had no staff, it was enough. My briefcase was next to the table, the newspaper was on the cupboard, and I went to the kitchen to turn on the kettle. Returning to my desk, I checked my phone messages, taking notes on the ones that were important. Opening the closet, I took out a folder with documents from one of my clients. I was a certified public accountant, and that was my world. My name. Well, it's not that important, because I used several pseudonyms. At school, I was first nicknamed Jesse because of my short stature and slight build. I was only 5'6", about 167 centimeters tall, and weighed about 6 stone 38 kilograms. My height remained the same, but my weight increased over time. The ones who called me Jesse were bigger than me. They were all bullies who bullied me with impunity. Then I learned one important lesson beyond what was taught in class. I realized that the world is structured on the basis of exchange. Hooligans who did not bother studying too much and would most likely lead a criminal lifestyle still had to take exams. They could not afford to be considered the fools of the class. I, on the contrary, studied diligently and soon found myself in a position where they needed my knowledge. Thus, a fragile truce was concluded. I helped them by doing their homework and preparing cheat sheets for exams, and they left me alone and protected me from other bullies. Did I feel guilty that others were being targeted? No. I grew up in the East End of London, where there was always a strong and a weak, and violence happened on a daily basis. Strength was not just about muscle, and men learned early to use their talents to survive. People not from London would call me Cockney, but they would be wrong. I was not born within earshot of the bells of St. Mary le Bow. My father was a docker. Every morning he stood in line at the dock gates with other workers in the hope that he would be hired that day. One day he died while working in the hold of a ship when a net containing a cargo broke and sacks of Brazil nuts fell on him. The work of dockers has always been seasonal and temporary, so we were not entitled to any insurance or compensation. After he died, my mother worked 3 cleaning jobs to dress me and make me look decent when I went to school. Going to grammar school presented an additional challenge as I needed a uniform for cricket in the summer and rugby in the winter. She coped by often denying herself the necessities so that I could have everything I needed. When I turned 23 and passed my exams to become an accountant, my mother left. I suspect that she had a man with whom she maintained a relationship all these years after the death of her father, and deciding that she had completed her mission, she decided to start a new life. She knew that I could handle it on my own. I never saw her again or heard anything about her. During my later school years, the nickname Jessie was forgotten, and I became just Jess, perhaps an acknowledgement on the part of the bullies that I was more useful to them as an ally than as a target for their bullying. Those hooligans had indeed chosen the criminal route, but they still called me Jess, since I was now handling their accounting, making it transparent to the tax service. They could not declare that the bulk of their income came from criminal activities. So I created companies for them that showed taxable income while leaving most of their actual income untaxed and unattainable. I made good money from this. My income was declared and taxed, but a significant amount was kept in foreign accounts, protected from greedy politicians. For the tax authorities, I was an honest and successful accountant. My role also extended into an area that could be described as criminal diplomacy. London, like other large cities, was divided into districts. Crime bosses defined the boundaries of their territories by sanctioning or prohibiting the plans of less powerful criminals. The underworld, usually prone to short tempers, did not handle negotiations well, so from time to time I was asked, for example by Mr. Brown, to discuss a problem with Mr. Green. Thanks to my calm nature and ability to avoid conflicts, I was able to find a compromise. Nobody needed gangster wars. They attracted too much attention from the press and police. Calm diplomacy allowed crime to flourish while remaining in the shadows. Mr. Brown and Mr. Green are, of course, pseudonyms, as is mine, Mr. Smith. Of course, I know their real names because I went to school with many of them. The fees for such intermediary services formed the basis of my tax-free reserve fund. The criminal world has changed in recent years. Bank robberies and attacks on cash in transit vehicles are a thing of the past. Crime now thrives on internet fraud, theft, and cloning of credit and debit cards. Most people have thousands of pounds in the form of small plastic cards in their wallets or pockets. My clients use this. This is almost a victimless crime since the main losses are borne by banks and insurance companies. I'm not fooling myself. I am just as guilty as my clients simply for keeping their secrets. Under British law, complicity is considered to be as serious a crime as the act itself. Our system was working flawlessly, but I was beginning to doubt that the same could be said about my marriage. I was starting to think that Lily, my wife, was hiding something. I had no direct evidence, no photographs, mysterious calls, or unexplained absences. It was rather the lack of certain details that aroused my suspicions. Accountants pay attention to the little things that others ignore. Credit card bills come in, and most people either glance at the balance and pay or don't pay attention to them at all, letting the automatic charge take care of the payment. I didn't do that. I carefully studied every line, including the accrued interest. If you think credit card companies don't make mistakes, you're living in a fantasy world. Over the past few months, Lily has added a beautiful dress and a very smart suit to her wardrobe. Even I could tell they weren't cheap. At first, I was glad that she wanted to look good for me. She wore these items to our events together, but mostly wore them to work. They were probably better quality than I thought was appropriate for an office. Curiosity prompted me to find out their cost. However, I did not find any mention of these purchases on her credit card statement. They weren't on the bank statement, either. It was our joint account. There were also no large cash withdrawals to cover expenses. It seemed that Lily got these things for free, but one of the lessons I learned in my early years was, nothing comes for free in this world. How did she get these things? Perhaps they were provided for her work. The receptionist must look good to create the first impression of the company. Another thought that haunted me was connected with a man. If a man buys clothes for a woman, it usually implies that he expects to take them off the owner in the future and enjoy her company in a more intimate setting. Was there another man? I couldn't say for sure, but it required investigation. I could figure out some of it on my own, but for most of it, I needed help. I knew where to find Frank at 11 o'clock in the morning. He was always at Starlight. The club is, of course, a cliché for a gang boss, but it made sense. With so many people coming and going, it was impossible to know who was talking to whom and about what. However, at this time of day, I was just an accountant who came to talk to a client. Frank had just arrived and was drinking his first cup of coffee. As soon as I entered his office, he poured coffee for me too. "Problems with bills, Jess?" he asked. Frank was one of those bullies I grew up with. "No, Frank," I shook my head. "I have a problem. Personal problem." "I know, but I'm not a plastic surgeon," he chuckled. For Frank, this was top-notch wit. I smiled faintly and continued, "I need someone who can keep an eye on my wife and find out where she goes." "Oh," his face became serious. "You don't think she—" He stopped mid-sentence. "It's possible," I replied. He sipped his coffee slowly, then nodded. "There is one person. He owes me something." Everyone owed Frank something. Even if they thought he wasn't, Frank had a knack for wringing favors out of even the most unlikely people. "I'll talk to him. Do you want to meet him here? I can invite him here this afternoon." I thought and nodded. "Yes, Frank. It will be good. Will he be careful?" "Will, if he knows what's good for him." He poured us both more coffee. "Jess, if she cheats on you, what will you do? Will you divorce her?" I thought about this. "No, if she resists, her lawyer will start digging into my finances to increase her support. I don't want anyone to meddle in my affairs. It could reveal a lot of things that we both would like to keep secret." He looked at me with concern. "No, I see where you're going with this. So what are you going to do?" "I'll just let her go with a monthly payment to keep her quiet." I could arrange a more radical solution. "Thank you, Frank. But no, thanks. The body has a habit of being. We don't want the police running around under our noses. Besides, I couldn't do that to Lily." "So you love her?" "Yes, I do. But if she cheats on me, she leaves. I can't live with her. Never." That day, I returned to Starlight. The man was waiting for me, nervous. A challenge from Frank usually had this effect. Frank introduced us. "Vin, this is Mr. Smith. He needs someone to be followed and given a full report of movements and encounters." He paused to let the words sink in and added ominously, "Mr. Smith is a good colleague of mine. I will be very upset if you try to perform any tricks." "Understood." Vin nodded quickly, his forehead glistening with nervous sweat. "Yes, Mr. Weston. Who should I keep an eye on and where?" It was a good question, and I answered. Vin needed to know who it was, which meant I would reveal my identity. "For my wife. Her name is Lily Martin." I wrote him my address. I want you to follow her for at least 2 weeks, at her job in Chelmsford and wherever she goes from there. I need details about who she dates outside of work and at home. If you can take photos, so much the better. She usually leaves home at 8:15 and drives a silver VW Golf. I took the piece of paper and wrote down the license plate number. Vin looked at the address. Where is this, Abbess Roding? Great start, I thought. It's about 6 miles north of Chipping Ongar. His face brightened. He knew where Chipping Ongar was. Okay, Mr. Martin, I'll be there tomorrow. Then he asked the right question. Is this Abbess Roding a small place? If so, I will be conspicuous there. This was a valid point. Yes, you will. 1 car per hour is already busy traffic for Abbess. I thought about it. Let's put it this way. She starts off on country roads, but then joins the A1060 just south of Margaret Roding. It's a busy road, so you can follow it without being seen. Leave it to me, Mr. Martin. How can I contact you? Call me at the office. I gave him my business card. He put it in his wallet and stood up. I'll call you in a few days to update you on the progress. When Frank and I were alone, he ordered more coffee. I don't understand you, Jess. You are the most collected person I know. Even now, you are calm and thinking things through. Do you ever get angry? Yes, Frank, I'm angry. In fact, I'm mad as hell right now. But anger is not the way to solve problems. You have to think things through before you do something that could turn against you. And you're going to wait how long? 2 weeks? 3? Or more? Vin will want to make, say, $500 a week from this, plus car expenses. What if he doesn't find anything? Then I'll be glad that she's not cheating on me. But my gut tells me it's cheating. I continued to live as usual. I knew full well how people perceived me. A quiet, harmless little man in a charcoal gray striped suit with a briefcase in his hands. In fact, I even encouraged this image. Hundreds of people like me go to work every morning. We work at our desks, surrounded by papers, dry and boring, reliable and unnoticeable, and most importantly, unremarkable. I liked being inconspicuous, and yet many of these men have secrets. For some, it's little secrets, like reading sex magazines on your lunch break before going home to your loving wife, who could never be as exciting as the girl in the pages. For others, it's gambling or drinking the need to bet on a sure bet or have a sneaky drink at the local pub before catching the bus or train home. I also had my secrets. The first is my connection with the criminal world. Even Lily didn't know about it. The second is that I hired surveillance on Lily, a woman I idolized. My dry, logical, mechanical brain recognized a possible problem and suggested a way to gather more information. But what if this information leads to the collapse of my marriage? My mind gave the answer, but my heart did not accept it. Lily held a special place in my life. Not just because she was beautiful. She knew how to bring joy into my life. My job, as many can imagine, left no room for fun. It required painstaking attention to detail and compliance with all accounting rules. But when I returned home, Lily pulled me out of this shell. She was full of joie de vivre, the joy of life, so much so that it was enough for me, filling my life with laughter, happiness, and pleasure. If she cheated, this life will end, and I will be inconsolable with pain and heartbreak. Vin called me on Monday. I have something for you, Mr. Martin. Can I tell you over the phone, or would you like to meet? I wanted to get ready, so I asked him to meet at Starlight. Even if Frank wasn't there, the staff knew me well enough to give me privacy. I'll meet you at Starlight at 2:30. Vin apologized to me. Sorry, Mr. Martin, but I'm sure your wife is hiding something. He looked at his notes. I've been watching her all week. From Tuesday to Thursday, she was at work all day, leaving only to buy a sandwich at the supermarket nearby. On Friday, she left by car at 11:30. She had a passenger with her. I followed them to Mark's Tay, where they stopped at the hotel for lunch. They left at 2 o'clock and went back to work. I returned to the hotel and asked a couple of questions. It turns out they dine there once a week, just like last Friday. This has been going on for about 5 weeks now. I also found out that he once booked a room and spent a couple of hours there. But my informant could not confirm that your wife was with him that day, although this is very likely. It was clearly not easy for Vin to say this and for me to listen. Oh God, Lily, what have you done to us? I gathered my courage. How did you get this information? I once worked in a hotel. You don't ask at the reception, you go to one of the receptionists. They know everything that's going on and are willing to talk if you offer some money. Do they know who books the rooms? Yes. The receptionist has a computer with access to a reservation database, so they know where to deliver luggage. Who is this person she is having lunch with? His name is Bennington. Bennington. I knew this name. He was the managing director of the company where Lily worked. I sat in silence, trying to comprehend what I had heard. Vin hasn't proven anything, except that my wife has lunch with her boss at least once a week. It was unreasonable on her part, but not cheating. If she had told me about it, it would have been acceptable, but she kept it a secret. Perhaps she spent 2 hours in the hotel with him, perhaps not. You can't accuse someone if there is no evidence. I need more. Vin, will you continue monitoring? Yes, Mr. Martin. There's something else. Bennington has reserved a private dining room for Friday. He and 3 guests will be there. I can sneak into the room before they arrive and my buddy will set up the digital cameras. If you think this will help. I looked at him. They won't be noticed. He shook his head. No, Mr. Martin. They are so small that we can install them in ventilation grills or smoke detectors. Do they take photos or videos? Video. But the signal works over a short distance, so my buddy will be nearby to download the recordings to the computer. Screenshots can be taken at any time. How much will it cost? I asked. Vin thought for a moment, perhaps wondering how much he could charge me. 100 for the receptionist and, say, 500 for my friend. I nodded. Do it. I took my wallet out of my inside pocket. Here are 2,000. Think of it as a week's pay and covering expenses. This should be enough for your friend and the receptionist. I put the money on the table. He was in no hurry to take them. Mr. Martin, I will take money for expenses, but you don't owe me anything for the work. This is a favor for Mr. Weston. I looked up in surprise. Vin, I know how Mr. Weston convinces people to do him favors. Your service is beneficial to me, and I believe that good work should be paid for. Take the money. There was no need to repeat it. The money immediately disappeared. Thank you, Mr. Martin. We left Starlight together. He went left, and I stopped a taxi. The club was near Canary Wharf and was now full of black cabs. A few years ago, they were hard to find during the day. Back then, none of the locals could afford to pay for a taxi ride. But an influx of financial workers with money burning in their pockets changed the situation. The taxi took me to Old Street to my office. I sat down at my desk and stared into space. Emptiness is what life now promised me. In this future, like an automatic machine, I will board the train in the morning, and none of the fellow travelers will know or even want to know about the bitter pain that I carry within myself every day. I will come to this office, put the numbers in the right columns, and even then the pain will remind me of what I have lost. And in the evening, I will return to an empty house. No, not a house, just a building, a dull, lifeless place, devoid of her laughter, her presence, her voice, even the scent of perfume that she left in any room. This will be my life. Logic said I had no evidence, but emotions told me otherwise. She allowed another man to see, touch, and control her. I gave him what I had once promised only to me. Lily, oh Lily, why? Why? When I got home that evening, I felt bad. I thought about how to avoid the intimacy with Lily that she probably expected in the coming days. In intimacy, we reveal our entire essence, hopes, dreams, and naked emotions. I couldn't play well enough to fool her. She would have realized that something was wrong. But I didn't have to pretend to be sick. The closer I got to the house, the stronger the knot in my stomach tightened until I felt really bad. Lily was alarmed. Did you eat something that didn't suit you? I shook my head. Don't think. Well, I ate kebab for lunch. She looked at me in surprise. Kebab? You, of all people, should know that reheating meat is a surefire way to get poisoned. What made you do this? I just wanted a kebab. It seemed like a good idea at the time. I tried to joke. It didn't work out. Let's go. We need to put you to bed. If you don't feel better in the morning, I'll call the doctor. The next morning, I really felt sick, and I would feel that way every morning for a long time to come. It was a disease that I had to learn to live with. Lily cared for me with touching tenderness. Drink some more liquid. You shouldn't remain dehydrated. She made sure I always had a bowl handy in case I threw up. When I did throw up, she was there, her cool hand touching my forehead and the other stroking my back soothingly. Her concern only increased the discord in my mind rather than helping to resolve it. I could stop everything, but what could I confront her with? Because she had lunch with her boss. I couldn't be sure that she would be one of the guests on Friday. Maybe I should pretend to be sick that day. Will she stay home to look after me? Maybe. But this will only delay the inevitable if there is one at all. Loyalty cannot be demanded as a right. It is a gift that one partner gives to another freely and unconditionally. I gave my allegiance to Lily with joy because I loved her with all my heart and mind. My sad thoughts were that she had already betrayed her obligations, even if she did not give him her body. She saw him in secret from me. The mind becomes unfaithful before the body. The following days passed in a fog. I know I went to work and apparently made the right decisions. If this were not the case, some of my clients might already be paying much more in taxes than they expected. But into this vacuum, my treacherous mind sent pictures, terrible pictures of Lily with another man. These disgusting images gave me some insight into the men who killed their unfaithful wives. I pushed these thoughts away. No matter how much I hated her for cheating, I still loved her. How could these two feelings coexist in me? That Friday, I decided not to go to work at my usual time. I wanted to see what Lily would wear. She seemed concerned about my presence at home after I usually left. This alarmed me. Are you still not feeling well, Chad? No, Lily, it's okay. Why are you asking? Well, you usually leave at 7:30. Oh, sorry, I didn't tell you that I won't go to the office at the usual time today. I have a meeting in Layton at 10. It would be stupid to drive to the office for 10 minutes and then come back. Lily accepted the explanation. However, when she came downstairs, she was wearing a belted Burberry coat. I looked at the coat with slight surprise. I think it might rain today, she explained. Was there guilt on her face? Maybe. She kissed me and left. I went upstairs and looked into her wardrobe. I, like most men, am probably not very observant. Therefore, Lily's choice of clothing has always remained a mystery to me. But I noticed a few dresses that I thought I had never seen before, and I wondered if they were gifts from her secret admirer. Whatever I found, I still found the dress I noticed the day I became suspicious, but the suit she wore before was missing. So, most likely, she was wearing it today. I've seen her in this suit at least once on her way to work, so why hide it now? That's probably why she wore Burberry. I left the house shortly after her and headed to work. At about 5:30, the bell rang. As always, I didn't give my name, just said hello and waited for the caller to ask for either Mr. Smith or Mr. Martin so I could figure out what kind of call it was. Mr. Martin? Yes, it's me. This is Vin, Mr. Martin. My heart was pounding as if it was ready to burst out of my chest. Will this be good news or bad? What do you have for me? I hate saying these words. I heard sympathy in his voice. Sorry, Mr. Martin. The pain in my stomach returned with a vengeance. I see, I replied, resigned to the idea that my marriage was over. Mr. Martin, I'm here, Vin. Can you come to my office on Monday? Certainly. At what time? Let's go at 11. I will. I hung up and stared into space. That Saturday and Sunday were busy days. Lily seemed in an extremely loving mood, but I could not reciprocate her feelings. If she was offended by my unresponsiveness to her displays of affection, she didn't show it, probably chalking it up to the stomach infection I'd had last week. We did all the usual weekend activities. On Saturday, we did a little shopping, and later I started cleaning our small garden plot. Our house was a traditional Essex clapboard building that I bought before we got married. I spent some time looking at the trim, and as usual, after the winter, I found areas that needed some work and paint. I took my time doing this work to avoid Lily's questioning glances. I was relieved to return to work on Monday, although I was nervous about what awaited me there. The bell rang just before 11. The top door and the door to the outside were opened using electronic locks controlled from my desk. Vin announced his arrival, and I opened the street door, listening to him walk up the stairs. As he approached the upper door, I pressed the other lock, and he entered the vestibule. I opened the door to my office. "Come in, Vin. Would you like tea or coffee?" "No, thank you, Mr. Martin." I pointed to a chair next to my desk, and he sat down. There was a huge monitor on my desk. He looked at it and shook his head. "Wow, this is a powerful thing." "You need this when you work with tables and reports," I answered. We were both evading the main purpose of his visit. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. "Okay, what do you have for me?" He brought with him a small sports bag, from which he took out a thick, padded bag and handed it to me. Inside were many photographs and a DVD in a case. "Mr. Martin, I would advise you not to watch this disc. Firstly, it lasts 2.5 hours, and what you see there will greatly upset you. Mr. Bennington and your wife met 2 other men at a hotel. They all went up to the private dining room, where the video shows them having lunch. The other men are one Mr. Haskins and Mr. Wello. Apparently, they may offer Bennington's company a large contract. I have their license plate numbers if you want to look into it further." After lunch, the staff cleared away the dishes and left them alone. Bennington appears to have locked the door and poured everyone more drinks. They talked for a bit, and then about 15 minutes later your wife climbed onto the table and began to undress. He stopped, clearly embarrassed. Then he continued, "She was completely undressed." And stopped again. "Sorry, Mr. Martin, but I don't want to tell you what happened next. It's better for you to look at the photographs yourself. Then you will understand everything. I'm really sorry." As he spoke, an icy weight began to form in my chest, which became larger and colder until I could no longer breathe normally, as if a frozen heart was shackling me from the inside. Words were not enough to describe how empty I felt. I lost someone I loved and watched as she was lowered into the ground. But the difference was that the deceased does not come back to torment you with memories of pain. Grief gave way to anger. I was angry at Lily, but most of all I was filled with bitter, unquenchable anger at Bennington and the other 2 men. Bennington knew that she was married, but he used her as an asset without caring about her husband. "I'll deal with Lily first, and then Bennington and his cronies." I cleared my throat. "Vin, can you use the license plate numbers to find out where these men live and whether they are married?" "It's possible, Mr. Martin. There will always be some cop who wants to make some cash." "How much will it cost?" "A couple hundred. I think that's enough." I nodded, and he continued, "Mr. Martin, you are a good person. I don't want to deceive you. I will find out everything, and you will pay me when the results are ready." We talked a little more before he left, but finally he said, "Don't do anything stupid, Mr. Martin." "I won't," I answered. I flipped through the DVD. I have never been a fan of adult videos, and certainly a film starring my wife could hardly interest me. I missed most of what happened, especially the moment when Lily climbed onto the table using a chair and flirtatiously began to take off her clothes. I just needed key moments and conversations. This turned out to be quite interesting and only increased my rage towards the 3 men. I couldn't look at how she allowed them complete control of her body. I would just vomit. The sound on the recording faded in and out depending on where the participants were standing. The men chatted after enjoying my wife to their heart's content. Lily, I assumed, had gone to the bathroom to clean herself up. The one I identified as Wello asked Bennington, "Where did you find her?" Bennington chuckled. "Good, isn't it?" "Just great," Haskins agreed. "Compared to her, my wife looks like a frozen statue." He glanced at Bennington. "Is there a chance to repeat it? I'm ready to pay for the room." "I think yes. Let me know when you want to come back." "She's married, right?" Wello asked. Bennington grinned. Yes, as far as I know, her husband is some kind of short man. She says he is an accountant, but most likely just a minor clerk. They all laughed out loud. I stopped recording. Well, I thought, let's see who will laugh last. But first I had to talk to Lily. I left the office shortly after Vin left. Lily usually got home around 6:30, at least an hour before me. As a rule, by this time she had already started preparing dinner, and such a domestic environment was not suitable for the upcoming conversation. It was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon when I opened the door of the house. I had enough time to prepare everything. I left the car in the pub car park, for some reason deciding that if Lily didn't know I was home, she would be surprised and it would unsettle her. A stupid thought, because she couldn't deny everything was on DVD. I put the disc in the player and paused the moment where they entered the room and sat down. From the photos that Vin called screenshots, I selected a few. I put them in a spare folder that I took from the office. I didn't need the rest of the photos, although my friend Vin had plenty of them. I made myself a cup of tea and sat down to wait. Lily came home at 5:25. She immediately went to the kitchen to boil the kettle and then entered the living room, which we called the hall, and froze in place when she saw me. Chad, you scared me. You're back early. Did something happen? Are you feeling unwell? I raised my hand to stop her. Yes, it happened. And no, I don't feel good. In that case, dear, I'll call the doctor. This has been going on for too long. Yes, it's too long, but the doctor won't help here. Sit down, Lily. She looked at me curiously and sat down in a chair. I pressed play on the remote. The screen lit up, and suddenly they appeared. I heard Lily gasp. I let the DVD play for a few minutes. She began to breathe heavily, almost suffocating. I turned to her. Interesting video, I remarked. She tried to catch her breath and moaned. No, for God's sake, no. She covered her face with her hands, and I heard her painful sobs. I stopped the recording and waited for her to calm down. This took some time. Every time her crying became quieter, she raised her face to look at me, but when she saw the stony expression on my face, she began to cry again. In the end, there were no tears left. Her face was blotchy and red from the tears drying on her cheeks. How? She cleared her throat and tried again. How did you? I interrupted her. It doesn't matter. All that matters is what I know. This DVD is 2.5 hours long, so you get the idea of what's on there. All, I shouted. Everything down to the last detail. She burst into tears again. To give Lily time to calm down, I went to the kitchen and made 2 cups of coffee. It seemed to me that caffeine would come in handy in such a conversation. I returned to the living room and brought a warm, damp towel so she could wash herself. Lily smiled faintly in gratitude and took a sip of her coffee. I'm so sorry, Chad, she said. I nodded. Of course you're sorry. But would you be sorry if I didn't find out? She didn't answer my question, and I didn't expect an answer. What are you going to do now, Chad? She asked. I won't do anything. You will do it. What do you mean? You will go upstairs, collect your things, and tomorrow you will leave this house and never return. Oh, Chad, is that necessary? I love you so much. I opened the folder and selected a photo. I placed it in front of her. Is this how you love me? I shouted. Lily burst into sobs again. I left her alone to calm down. Anger burned inside me, but I couldn't let it take over me, otherwise I might hurt her. When I returned, she had already come to her senses. Are you going to divorce me? She asked, scared. No, Lily, I'm not going to. Hope flashed in her eyes, but I immediately destroyed it. If you decide that you prefer the life that Bennington gives you, then you will have to file for divorce. I'm using these photos in court for my defense, and you'll probably get nothing. Moreover, this could lead to Bennington's own divorce. I'm guessing his wife will leave him with nothing, so it's unlikely you'll have a good life with him unless he starts selling you out to others. You seem to be succeeding at this. Lily turned pale when I compared her to a call girl, but she didn't argue. She did not know that the DVD and photographs would not be accepted in court because they were obtained illegally. I won't be with him. In fact, I don't even like him that much, she muttered. A question flashed through my mind. If this is so, why did she give him her body? But I didn't ask it so as not to listen to humiliating explanations. Why don't you want to divorce me? She asked. This makes no sense. I'm not going to get married again. You seem to have completely taken away my desire for family life. Divorce would cost me too much. I've worked too hard to jeopardize everything. You will leave. If you have any pride left in you, you will find another job and try to forget what you did. However, I will give you money to live on. Get yourself your own bank account, because starting tomorrow your cards will stop working. I will transfer funds to you every month. Oh, and you can leave the car. Lily looked puzzled. Why are you doing this? Lily, I loved you, and even now I still do, but what you did hurt me too much. You were worried that I haven't been feeling well lately. It wasn't the stomach flu, it was the realization of what you were doing that caused it. I can't live with you anymore. Every time I looked at you, I would remember this and be angry with you. I gave you my heart when we got married, and I can't take it back. Even so, my love does not allow me to leave you in trouble. Darling, we could find a way to get through this together, she tried. Oh yes, I answered sarcastically. It's not we who have to overcome this, Lily. It's me. I watched you have fun with those men, and I almost threw up. My wife, the woman I love, allows other men to use her body, and she looks happy. These damn pictures are etched in my memory. The only way to overcome this is complete amnesia. Lily walked gloomily upstairs, slowly gathering her things. Every time I passed by, she looked at me pleadingly, but I could not change my mind. The images in my head cruelly reminded me of everything that had happened. She called someone named Daphne that evening and, as I suspected, had arranged to stay somewhere. I heard Lily coming down the stairs, accompanied by heavy thuds. Apparently her suitcase was too heavy. A week ago, I would have run to help her, but this evening I stayed sitting, and I will never do that again. She entered the living room. I'm leaving. One of my colleagues agreed to host me for a few days. I'll be leaving work tomorrow without notice, she said, clearly expecting me to tell her to stay. I crushed her hopes. It's a pity that you didn't write a statement a couple of months ago, I snapped bitterly. Chad, I'm so sorry, so terribly sorry. Please remember, I really love you, she said, sobbing. I didn't answer. She opened the door, and I heard her sobbing as she dragged her suitcase outside. The door slammed shut. I spent the rest of the evening in complete despondency and went to bed much later than usual. The bed linen still smelt of her, and I couldn't stop crying. The only consolation in this situation was that Lily didn't say those stupid words. It didn't mean anything. It was just sex, or it's not what you think. How can cheaters even say something like that when the evidence was on my screen? I knew I did the right thing, but my God, it hurt so much. Lily hurt me, and I hurt myself. When will this end? Routine and attention to detail have always been the basis of my life. However, I have already been late to the office twice in the last week. My Punjabi newspaperman was so worried about this that the next day, when I finally appeared, he ran out of his shop. Mr. Martin, Sahib, it's so unusual for you to be late. I already thought that my watch was broken because you are never late. Mr. Chandali, there's nothing wrong with your watch. I had some business close to home that I resolved first. Don't worry, the world hasn't changed that much. I'm glad to hear that, Mr. Martin. But today you didn't even take the newspaper. Let me bring it. He ran to the store and came back with a copy of my usual Financial Times. He presented it to me as if it were a priceless gift. I reached for the money, but he raised his hands in protest. No, no, Mr. Martin. This is from me. I'm happy. I wandered upstairs to the office, somewhat reassured by this act of human kindness. Later that day, Vin called. Just wanted to know if you were okay, Mr. Martin. Thank you, Vin. My self-esteem has taken a huge hit, but I will survive. And Mrs. Martin? She came in. I'm sorry to hear this, but I don't think you had any other choice. I agreed with him. He continued, I will have details about those two men soon. A police officer I know says that if the cars are registered to a company, should he go deeper? What does he mean? Well, he can call the company officially, and since he is a police officer, he will be told who these cars are assigned to and their home addresses. Vin, you have very dubious friends among the police, I chuckled. Only a couple, Mr. Martin. Only a couple. I had no reason to rush home, so I decided to stay in the office longer than usual, probably causing Mr. Shandali to worry again. However, this was not a job for my clients. It was a personal investigation. Many people would be surprised how much information can be found about a business. I intended to study Mr. Bennington and the company where he was managing director, Elwin Dack's company. I had two computers in my office. The main one, where I did accounting, never connected to the internet. I even removed the wireless module. I knew from Frank and others how easy it was to hack a computer. The second computer was used exclusively for internet access. House company gave me a lot of information, including last year's accounts. These were abbreviated reports, but they were quite useful if you knew how to read them. After a general introduction, I turned my attention to the reserve fund. Any well-managed company should have such a fund. In essence, it was the company's piggy bank. In good years, excess funds were put aside in a reserve fund. This reduced net profit was not taken into account when distributing dividends and was not included in the calculation of taxes. During bad years, the reserve fund was used to cover low or no earnings, allowing the company to continue paying dividends. Another reason for creating such a fund was the ability to quickly access capital in case of sudden and unforeseen need. Many accountants considered the reserve fund to be an indicator of the health of the company. Although Elwin Dack's company annually showed modest profits, the reserve fund was insignificant. Interesting, I thought. Either the reserve fund was used to support profits and is now almost empty, or it was never in good shape. Then I turned to the site Dun and Bradstreet. Registration is required to enter there, but accountants are always registered on D.B. Their reports are worded very carefully, indicating that their summary is based on available data and should not be taken as evidence of the financial strength of the company. Accountants know how to read between the lines, and the report Elwin Dack's company did not inspire optimism. Further investigation was required, but that required a visit to company's house. What I was looking for was not available on the internet. The next day, I went straight to company's house and returned to my office late in the morning. For the first time in weeks, I felt content. I was determined to destroy Bennington and was glad that he himself contributed to this. You could say that once a scoundrel, always a scoundrel, and Bennington was just that. I managed to obtain interesting facts that, although they did not show obvious falsifications, hinted at their possibility. I left a message for Vin. I had a new task for him. He called that afternoon. "How can I help you, Mr. Martin?" "Yes, Vin. Could you go to Chelmsford and watch the company where my wife worked?" "What exactly to look for?" "Write down the registration numbers of their trucks. I doubt you'll be able to capture everything, since they have about 25 cars that drive around the country. But if you write down most of them, that will be enough." "Yes, that's not a problem. A couple of days and everything will be ready." That's exactly what I thought. "Do you want to know who they are registered to?" He impressed me. Vin wasn't stupid. "You got ahead of me." "Yes, I do." "Leave it to me, Mr. Martin. I will contact you in 3 to 4 days." My suspicions were aroused by the data on vehicle fleet depreciation. Statements were consistent with instructions HM Customs and Revenue, but there was no mention of capital costs for these vehicles in the capital bill. Instead, almost similar maintenance amounts were recorded annually. However, such trucks are expensive, and as they wear out, maintenance costs increase. This indicated that no new trucks were purchased and the fleet was aging. However, maintenance costs remained unchanged. This seemed suspicious to me, and the suspect's name was Bennington. My days have returned to relative normality. However, the nights in Abbess Roding remained my personal swamp of despair. We always had a cleaning lady who came twice a week, so after a few days the scent of Lily's perfume disappeared. But there were still many reminders of her. I would walk into the room and see the painting on the wall that she had chosen with me, and my eyes would fill with tears. The bedding on the bed, washed, dried, and ironed, was the same pattern that Lily had chosen and purchased. I looked at it all and imagined us together, hugging naked, loving each other, connected in the most intimate moment that lovers share. Then I would rage again, cursing her and Bennington for ruining an almost perfect life. And then I felt guilty for cursing Lily. I loved her, and this pain will remain with me for the rest of my life. Vin did his job. He provided a list of car numbers, 18 of them. And what's most interesting, all of them were registered to a leasing company. Bennington and his crooked CFO, who clearly had a stake, write off depreciation and maintenance on vehicles the company did not own. What else were they hiding? I was sure they had other scams, but I didn't have time to look for them. This scheme was an accounting falsification scheme and deserved a prison sentence. This is where the problem arose. I could have reported this to the IRS, but the less I had to deal with them, the better. These guys are suspicious, and they might wonder why I'm digging into the affairs of a company that I have nothing to do with. What if they become interested in me? My reports are fine, but there's always a chance they'll find something. Vin added some information that I didn't ask for. Your wife doesn't work there anymore, Mr. Martin. Did this make me happy? I thought about it. I needed documentary evidence that the cars belonged to the leasing company. I wrote to them, introducing myself as the external auditor who accidentally destroyed the copy of the contract that had been sent earlier. I apologized for being too awkward to ask for company. Elwin Dax sent another copy. 2 weeks later, I received a copy of the agreement listing all the vehicles covered by the agreement. I researched the company. There are many online resources where you can get information, and I had to turn to many to put the big picture together. Founded in 1897 to transport flour from rural Essex to London bakeries, the company had long existed as a profitable but undistinguished business. Immediately after the First World War, it took advantage of the opportunity to buy cheap army trucks to expand into the small freight business. The grain business eventually died out, and today the company was engaged in general trucking and warehousing. It never changed its corporate status, and today the company's shareholders were primarily descendants of Alvin Dax. Whereas previously the shares were owned by 3 people, the children of the founder, now they were held by 22 descendants, each of whom owned less than 10% of the shares, with the exception of 2 people who together owned just over 30%. These 2 were also listed as directors. An idea began to form in me. I doubted that these 2 directors had any business acumen. One of them is retired Lieutenant General R. Stanley, the other is Mrs. T.B. Dax. The other directors are Bennington and G.M. Chambers, secretary of the company. Do General and Mrs. Dax understand that as directors they have a legal responsibility for the accuracy of the financial statements presented? I doubted it. Do they know that without an asset that supports the profitability of a company, it can be considered effectively insolvent? And this is already a criminal offense. Now the question was, how do I use this information? I decided to consult with Frank. It seemed to me that he had a chance to acquire a promising enterprise for little money. Frank was skeptical at first. Jez, all this shenanigans just to get revenge on this guy? I can just send a couple of guys over to give him a good beating. It's easier and faster. That's right, Frank. But unless he is killed, he will still recover, and his lifestyle and position will remain intact. And of course, we should not forget that this would be an assault causing grievous bodily harm, which, to put it mildly, is illegal, I reminded him. And my method will ruin him financially for the rest of his life. Perhaps he will even sit down, and at the same time I am acting legally. Frank sighed. Okay, Jez, I'll play along, but how much will it cost? I only need your name. I will finance everything, but I don't want my name to appear on the documents. This might alert Bennington. As a result, you will get a profitable enterprise. Damn it, Jez. You want to force me to do honest business. I can imagine how shocked my family will be. Frank Weston is a pillar of the community. My father would be rolling over in his grave. I had the same conversation with Jack Hallam, another one of my clients who lives a similar lifestyle. Frank knew that I would turn to Jack, and it didn't bother him. Jack didn't mind either. He listened to the story and offered the same help that Frank had offered. Again, I convinced him that my way was better. I wouldn't do this for anyone else, Jez. But you were always honest with me, and your advice was sound. I'm with you. The reason I needed another name was so that buying a large number of shares in one name would not alert large shareholders. The register of shareholders provided me with their addresses, and I wrote to all the small shareholders, informing them that my principal was interested in buying them and offering a price that made their eyes light up. Their willingness to sell did not surprise me. Shareholders regularly received dividends, but not in the amounts they would like. The opportunity to get several £1,000s for mediocre shares seemed too tempting to them. Not everyone agreed, but enough did for me to gain influence at the next shareholders' meeting. At the meeting, I represented Frank and Jack as their proxy. A meeting of shareholders was supposed to take place in March, a few months later, mainly to approve reports and set dividends. I learned from those shareholders who agreed to sell shares that few of them even attended meetings. Having inherited shares and not being serious investors, they showed little interest in the company's affairs. Therefore, I was not surprised when, at the appointed time, I entered the meeting room and saw that only Mrs. Dux, Lieutenant General Stanley, Bennington, Chambers, and myself were present. When I entered, surprised glances rose, and I was asked about the purpose of my presence. I presented written powers of attorney signed by Frank and Jack. Chambers checked them and announced, "Welcome to the meeting, Mr. Martin." Bennington's face tensed as if he had swallowed a live frog. I saw the thought running through his head. Was this the Martin he had cuckolded? Stanley opened the meeting. The reports were distributed to everyone for review. Mrs. Dax and the Lieutenant General didn't even bother to read them, which confirmed my assumption about their weak business skills. I studied the reports carefully, which was unusual here. Bennington and Chambers were visibly nervous. "Is something bothering you, Mr. Martin?" Chambers asked. "No, nothing." "Why are you asking? Am I holding you back?" "No, not at all. If you have questions, I can explain," Chambers replied. "Oh, I beg your pardon," I smiled. "Now comes the most interesting part." I took out my business card and handed it to him. "As you can see, I am also qualified, just like you. Accountants always check, don't they?" Chambers was not satisfied. He handed my card to Bennington, whose face turned even redder. The frog seemed ready to jump back out. Stanley picked up a pen to sign the reports. I turned to him. "Lieutenant General, I wouldn't sign this if I were you. You will commit an offense." "What? What do you mean, sir?" "I'm sorry, but I have to say that these reports are inaccurate, to say the least, false." The general looked at me sternly. "Mr. Martin, you must be prepared to confirm this accusation." "We're wasting time," Bennington interrupted loudly. "We need to discuss other issues." I ignored him and answered the general. "Of course, sir. Could you find a clause regarding fleet maintenance and depreciation?" The general found the appropriate item. "Yes, it looks quite normal." "That would be true, sir," I replied, "if the company actually owned these vehicles. Of course, we own them. Our fleet of vehicles has been operating for many years." I shook my head. "No, sir." I opened the folder and took out a copy of the leasing agreement, handing it to the general. "Please look at this agreement." I then took out the list of vehicles covered by the contract and handed that over too. "This is a list of cars. I think you'll find it comprehensive." The general read the agreement, then the list. He handed the papers to Mrs. Dax. The signatures on the agreement belonged to Bennington and Chambers. Both men were clearly nervous, their faces turning purple. The general understood enough. "Bennington, I think you have something to explain. We'll go to your office, and you'll tell me what's going on here." I didn't want this. The general most likely did not know enough about accounting, and Bennington could skillfully confuse him. "General," I called out to him, "this has been happening for many years. An explanation for this year alone is not enough. Without this asset, it can be argued that the company is effectively insolvent, and this is already a criminal offense. I recommend immediately stopping the company and conducting an independent audit." "This is not necessary," Bennington shouted. He looked like a man on the verge of a breakdown. "Shut up, man," the general growled in a voice suitable for the parade ground. He thought for a moment, then turned to Mrs. Dax and whispered something to her. She nodded and looked at me. "Mr. Martin, are the general and I facing criminal prosecution?" I nodded. "Yes, I think it's quite possible. Then the general and I will support your proposal." "I echo your request." Chambers had to record this in the protocol, after which he asked, "Who's in favor?" The general and Mrs. Dax raised their hands, as did I. They had more than 30% of the shares. I had 22% of the proxy votes. Victory was ours. After the meeting, I ran into Bennington by chance. He looked at me with hatred. "Bastard," he said. I nodded. "That's how I am. Don't mess with little accountants with little virtues. Some of us have power." Now he knew exactly who I was. I was sure that the audit would reveal even more questions for Bennington. What does it feel like to stand on the edge of an abyss, knowing that a fall is inevitable? 4 weeks later, the independent auditors completed their work. As a shareholder, Frank received a copy of the report and brought it to me. "I don't understand anything. What does it say here?" he asked. I quickly read the report, noticing how he looked around with obvious disgust. "Why are you still living in this shitty place?" he asked. I ignored his remark for a moment, focusing on the contents of the report. Everything confirmed my guesses. Bennington was involved in numerous fraudulent schemes, mostly involving defrauding shareholders and the IRS through falsified financial statements. The auditors reported this to the tax service, and they have already begun their investigation. They work slowly but carefully, not missing a single detail. Ultimately, this test will break Bennington and Chambers into small pieces. The police are already involved. "Bennington has condemned me to a world of pain," I told Frank. "Now he will experience it for himself." I explained to him the contents of the report and its implications for Bennington. Frank winced. "I think he'll meet some of my friends when he's in a warm place," he chuckled. He then returned to his question about my home. "Why do you still live here?" "Frank, I live here because it's convenient. If I move to a nicer place, it will attract attention. The IRS might be interested, and the last thing you or I want is attention from the tax authorities. So I'm staying here. They think I'm just a mediocre accountant with no great ideas to avoid taxes and leave me alone. That suits me." He chuckled. "I thought you would say that." "Well, what should we do now with this company that you just destroyed?" "It's not destroyed," I answered. "She is viable. I think shareholders will be happy to sell their shares for a symbolic amount. If you or Jack want to take control of her, it won't cost too much. You will get a profitable enterprise with trucks operating throughout the country and possibly beyond its borders." I added the last one on purpose to get his attention, and it worked. "Yeah, this could be interesting," he said, walking away thoughtful. I decided to add a little torment to Bennington. Vin carried envelopes with copies of DVDs and screenshots. He delivered these envelopes personally, dropping them into the mailboxes of the homes of Bennington, Haskins, and Wello. Lawyers will be very grateful for the work that I provide them. A few weeks later, the general called me. "Mr. Martin, my cousin Mrs. Dax, and I would like to thank you for your help. Looks like we'll have to pay a fine to the IRS, but it won't be too big. They seem to reserve the bulk of their anger for Bennington and Chambers. Could you advise us what to do with the company? To be honest, neither Mrs. Dax nor I are particularly interested in preserving it." This was the moment I had been waiting for. "General Stanley, I think perhaps my principals, Mr. Weston and Mr. Hallam, might be willing to undertake this. But given the company's poor reputation, it will take some time for subsidies to get it back up and running." "Understood. If you talk to them for us and find out what they say. The shares aren't worth more than a penny right now, so we'll take any reasonable offer." Vin was very helpful. He seemed to have his finger on the pulse, and a couple of months later, he came into the office. This time, he still accepted the offer to drink a cup of coffee. He handed me a couple of newspapers. One of them was Chelmsford Weekly News. The front page reported on the problems of the oldest local company, Elwyn Dax Limited, and an investigation by the tax service. On another page, circled, was a note that Mrs. Ida Bennington was divorcing her husband Walter. Mention was made of photographs in which he was captured in an intimate embrace with a young woman. The second newspaper was Southend Standard. It covered the sudden departure of two executives from a local manufacturing company, Mr. Curzon K.B. Haskins and Mr. M. Wello. Both were fired for actions that discredited the company's reputation and behavior unworthy of their status. It was also mentioned that they both recently separated from their wives. I thanked Vin for his thoughtfulness. So I achieved my revenge, but suddenly I felt empty. While I was seeking retribution, it gave me strength, even excitement, when everything went according to plan. And now, I didn't know what I was feeling. I was empty. It's been a year since I insisted Lily leave. This year has been full of regular work and my extra activities. I didn't stop to think about where my life was going and what I would do next. Once upon a time, it was simple. I would work until my overseas investments reached a sufficient level, and then Lily and I would move to a warmer climate for a comfortable life. Bennington and his accomplices destroyed this dream. I couldn't imagine finding another woman to share my life with. Having been burned once, I wouldn't risk it a second time. Any woman in my life, no matter how loving, would have to deal with my distrust. Suspicions of her actions would destroy any relationship, turning them into constant quarrels and mistrust. Stripped of my ambitions, I did what I did best, immersed myself in the strict world of accounting. The general called me to tell me that Frank and Jack had refused to buy the stock. "Looks like we're stuck with them," he said, and then continued. "Mr. Martin, you said the company was viable if it was managed properly." I agreed that I had said this. "Well, would you consider running it for us? I would be willing to give you shares to give you an incentive, and I'm sure a good salary could be negotiated. General, I am flattered by your offer, but I must say that accountants are not suitable for managing companies. We need an entrepreneur, a person with ideas, ready to take risks. Accountants, by their education, are incapable of this. For proof, just look at the large enterprises in this country that have failed. British Rail, British Steel, Austin Rover, they were all managed by accountants." "Understood. Damn them, the army is now run by accountants too," he said bitterly. "Okay, let's move on to the next one. Would you like to come and have lunch with me? My cousin, Mrs. Dax, as well as I, would like to express our gratitude for your help. I assume you live near Chelmsford. Will Tuesday next week be convenient for you?" It was obvious that he was not used to rejection, so I agreed. He gave me his address. He lived near Danbury. He ended with the words, "Between 12 and half, the first will be just right." I will continue translating the next part. I drove to Danbury in a pretty good mood. It's been a year since I asked Lily to leave, and during that time I haven't gone out once. I quite liked the general. He was a little old-fashioned, but easy to get along with. He didn't have to pretend to be an old soldier. He was one, and I'm sure he had a lot of interesting stories. His house was not at all what I expected. The images of an estate with a park dissipated when I saw a modest bungalow, and the imaginary park was replaced by a very neat, well-kept garden. The general met me at the door. "Mr. Martin, thank you very much for coming." "Glad to see you, General. Call me Ambrose." "Chad." He nodded. "Short for Charles, I believe." He invited me in, where I was greeted by Mrs. Dax. She asked to call her Terry. Her name was actually Teresa. I've been called Terry all my life. Ambrose brought us our drinks and sat down. "Chad, I speak for both of us when I thank you for the great service you have done for us. As you can imagine, I inherited these shares. The Army doesn't really need accountants, and I know absolutely nothing about running a business. Terry's husband was the last of the Dax family to be personally involved in the company's affairs. When he died, Bennington seemed like our savior. We would never have known what he was doing until the company collapsed. I suspect that it would cost us much more than just the IRS fine. Thank you." I made appropriate neutral comments. Over lunch, the conversation was light and pleasant until Ambrose asked me a direct question over coffee. Why are you interested in our company? I started to shy away, saying that my principals are always interested in potential purchases. He shook his head, clearly not believing it. Is this related to Bennington, Chad? He asked. Or perhaps with the fact that the young woman with your last name suddenly left? I raised my hands like a surrendering soldier. Okay, you figured me out. He chuckled. Is she your wife? Terry Dax joined the interrogation. I nodded. But you are no longer together. No, I confirmed sadly. Ambrose looked at me with sympathy. It won't help you, but she wasn't the only one. Bennington has been quite busy in this area. Did you know? I was a little irritated. No, but police questioned the staff, and it appeared some of them knew what he was doing. Police also found a bottle of liquid in his desk. After checking, it turned out that this was one of those disgusting substances that scoundrels put in girls' drinks. Terry came up to me and put a caring hand on my shoulder. Maybe this knowledge will help you. She was not under control. I shook my head. She was in control when she went to lunch with him so many times. I don't think his substance changed anything. She shouldn't have been there to begin with. My outburst ruined the conversation. Ambrose tried to change the subject and asked an innocuous question. You seem to live near Chelmsford? I readily accepted the change of topic. Yes, I live in Abbess Roding. Oh, how wonderful, Terry perked up. Roding are such beautiful villages. The conversation turned to the topic of English villages, and I soon felt that it was time to leave, so as not to abuse the hospitality. However, the general unexpectedly made another insightful remark. This Mr. Weston is quite a complicated man. We asked what seemed to me a very reasonable price for the shares, but he offered so little that if we accepted it, we would simply give them away. I suspect he's a bit of a cheater. I smiled. Perhaps you are right, Ambrose. He's a guy from the East End of London, like me. I think he's a little cunning and spinning. Ambrose chuckled. I think it's called economy with truth. We had a lot of these in our army. Always subject to disciplinary measures, but they were damn good soldiers. Exactly the ones you want to be around when things get tough. As I drove home, I thought about what Ambrose had said. So, Bennington was a serial seducer, and Lily was just one of his victims. This didn't change my decision. If his exploits were known around the office, Lily should have been warned. She allowed him to take her to dinner for weeks. She must have understood what he was trying to achieve, but she continued to meet with him. To me, this meant that she agreed to his terms. Finding out that Bennington was sentenced to 2 years in prison was disappointing. This scoundrel will serve his time in an open prison because he was not considered dangerous. To society, he may not have been a threat, but to other men's wives. This is a completely different story. What made me happy was that during the divorce process, his wife literally squeezed everything out of him. When he gets out of prison, he will be homeless, most likely without money, and never again able to find a job at the level he once was at, and which he used to his advantage. Vin couldn't find anything about Haskins or Wello other than a brief mention in the newspaper. I was fine with that. No, that didn't suit me at all. I was left forever without the person who made my life happy, and they did this to me. Fate isn't done with me yet. She still kept her surprises. The General and Mrs. Dax continued to keep in touch. I wouldn't call them close friends, but we became pleasant acquaintances. Elwyn Dax Limited resumed its activities after an investigation, since the tax service decided not to seek liquidation of the company, but a strong leader was needed. That day, I sat with them in the boardroom to interview 2 candidates to replace Bennington. One of them seemed particularly suitable to me, although both could have done the job. After the candidates left, we sat in the meeting room with cups of tea, discussing the candidates. They both agreed that one of them had a particularly impressive resume and wanted to make him an offer. I had to point out that attracting him would require a high salary and bonus structure. I agree he is the best candidate, but I doubt he will agree to work here for a package that you can afford. The company is currently operating with a fairly large overdraft. Spending cuts are necessary until this debt is reduced. Perhaps you should stick with Mr. Seddon. I think he will get the job done and the company will be able to afford him. Chad, you sound like an accountant now, Ambrose jokes. I thought that was why you asked me to be here. I smiled, and he smiled back. Terry Ducks resolved the dispute. I think we should listen to Chad. He's given us good advice before, and we should take his advice now, Ambrose. He nodded. Agree. Terry Ducks suddenly changed the subject. Chad, have you ever thought about your wife? No. You should think about it. I believe that she was just as much a victim in this situation as you are. Why do you think so, Terry? From what you said, and from what we learned from the investigation, Bennington was a skilled seducer. He was her boss, and as an employee, she was inclined to follow his instructions. Nobody talked about his exploits until the police started asking questions, so it wasn't common knowledge. I doubt she understood his intentions, and I'm sure he was a master at telling beautiful stories. And if he then used that drug, I think many girls could fall for it. For months, I convinced myself that Lily knew what she was doing. I clung to this thought. However, Terry suggested a completely plausible scenario. Lily was never submissive, but she was very conscientious in her work and always followed her superior's instructions to the smallest detail. If she knew nothing of his reputation, she probably wouldn't have questioned his requests. And then it might have been too late. Terry's words haunted me as I pulled out of the driveway and turned left. If I ask Lily to come back, will this happen again? My gut feeling told me no. There was a supermarket very close by, and I suddenly decided to go shopping. I especially needed washing powder. My cleaner, Mrs. Solby, took over the laundry after one of my failed experiments. One day I was left without powder and clean shirts at the same time. I threw things into the machine and decided to use dishwashing liquid instead of powder. Bad idea. I had to run the wash 3 times to get all the foam out. Even after this, the shirts smelled of detergent for a long time. I took the basket and went into the supermarket. Imagine my surprise when I saw Lily at the cash register. Or I thought it was her, although she wore a hat with a veil covering her face. Was it fate that decided to intervene again? I quickly made my purchases and headed to the same cash register where she stood. But of course, by that time she was no longer there. I spoke to the cashier. The lady in the veil, I thought I recognized her. Oh yes, Mrs. Martin. She lives around the corner and comes here every day. Why is she wearing a veil? She seems to have a skin disease. I don't know for sure. I've only been here for 4 weeks. You don't know where she lives? No, I only know that it's on Hathaway Road, but nothing more. I left the store thinking. A battle raged in my head between my mind and my heart. No, my mind told me, she is no longer in your life. Remember what she did. But then curiosity intervened. What skin disease? Lily had nothing like this when she was with me. I found Hathaway Road. It was one of those long streets that can be found near the center of any city. Long rows of Edwardian houses, built for what were called craftsmen in those days, before the First World War. Bay windows with an angled slate roof projecting just below the second-floor windows. These were once popular and well-designed homes. They now appear to have been divided into apartments and rooms. The local council provided residents with bins, despite the fact that terraced houses had no space to store them other than in the front garden. The Edwardians could not imagine a time when every family would have a car, so they did not provide garages. The road was lined on both sides with parked cars, some of which seemed to have been parked there forever, judging by the flat tires and layers of mud mixed with bird droppings. I parked in the first place I could find. I chose the nearest door and knocked. After some time, the door opened slightly, and a woman's face appeared in the opening. Yes, sorry for disturbing you. I'm looking for a woman named Mrs. Martin. Do you know what room she lives in? No. The door began to close, but I hastily added, she wears a hat and a veil. The door opened a little wider. I saw her. She's walking down the street over there. She pointed to the right. Thank you. The door closed before I could say thank you. I returned to the car, debating whether to drive on or leave a parking spot. I decided to drive a little further, hoping to find the place again. After about 200 yards, I started looking for parking again and soon noticed another empty space. I wasn't sure if I should park there as there was a lot of broken glass on the road. However, I didn't see any other options, so I went there. I chose another door at random and knocked. After waiting a few minutes and receiving no answer, I went next door. This time the door opened and a Pakistani man came out to meet me with a stern expression on his face. I explained that I was looking for a woman and described her. At the mention of the veil, his face softened a little. I don't know her name, but she lives over there in house number 316. It appears to be a ground floor apartment. I thanked him and crossed the road to find house number 316. The front fence of the house had once been torn down, presumably to make way for a parking lot. Now this area is occupied by garbage cans. There were two bells at the door, one with a sign saying upper apartment, the other without a sign. I assumed it led to an apartment on the ground floor and pressed the button. While I was waiting, my heart suddenly began to beat faster. Why am I nervous? The door opened and Lily and I stood looking at each other in silence. She was wearing a hat and veil. It seemed like 5 whole minutes passed before she spoke. Well then, who was brought to us by the wind? Hello, Lily. That's all. You kicked me out, and all these months later, you just show up with, "Hey, Lily." It's just a greeting. She shrugged. I think you'd better come in, she said surly, then turned and walked away. I followed her, letting the door close behind me. The door to her apartment was the first one on the right, and she held it open for me to enter. The apartment was furnished sparsely with the appearance of second-hand furniture, but there was not enough of it. One chair, a small table, and an electric fireplace where the fireplace mantel used to be. To the side, with his back to the window, stood a portable television on a low table. I looked around, then turned to her, just as she took off her hat and veil. I was shocked to the core. Damn it, what happened to you? Her face was disfigured. She looked at me defiantly, and I saw anger in her eyes. Come to see what you did, Chad. Well, take a good look. You only have to look once, and I will see it in the mirror every day for the rest of my life. The rage in her voice was undeniable. Lily, what happened? As if you don't know, she said scornfully. What are you talking about? What did you mean when you said, as if I don't know? Her defiant gaze trembled slightly. You don't have to play innocent, she said. You understand perfectly well what I mean. Lily, I understand absolutely nothing. Now she looked uncertain. The one who did this said, "This is revenge." I thought. I assumed that it was you who arranged everything. I shook my head sadly. How long have we been together, Lily? 6 years, 3 months, and 17 days. The answer was so quick and confident that I was even surprised. You managed to get to know me during these 6 years, 3 months, and how long were there? 17 days. Do you really believe that I could do or arrange something like that? So cruel and full of malice. Is that how you saw me? Tears rolled from under the eyelids, which could no longer close completely. She shook her head. No, I couldn't. But only one other person could hate me as much as you do. And who is this, Lily? It was me, she screamed. It was me, she repeated with a cry. Her emotions were genuine. No, Lily, I didn't hate you. I hated what you did, but not you, never you. I closed the distance between us and hugged her. She trembled, sobs shaking her body. I took a handkerchief out of my pocket, glad that I had taken a clean one this morning. I handed it to her, which brought on another burst of tears as she accepted it. 10 minutes passed, or maybe 15, I didn't know. Finally, she pulled herself together and returned the scarf to me. Why did you come, Chad? You do realize that this only brings back all the pain, right? I saw you in the supermarket. I wasn't sure if it was you, but the cashier said it was Mrs. Martin and that you lived on Hathaway Road. So I decided to come in to see if it was you and if everything was okay with you. She looked at me calmly, and I shook my head. No, Lily, To be honest, I don't know why I came. One part of me said, "No, don't remember the past." The other said, "Go see her." Even when I crossed the road and rang the doorbell, I was still doubtful, and my stomach was in knots. She nodded. "Yes, Chad. This is more like the truth. Sorry for the tears. Would you like some tea? It would be nice. I'm completely dry, like the Sahara." She went to put the kettle on. "Come in, Chad, if you can stand the sight of me." She led me into the back room, which served as the kitchen. "Thank you for the money you sent me. Now they are just a salvation, because I can no longer find a job. People look at my face, and I see the refusal in their eyes." She continued, "I had to sell the car. I couldn't afford to support her, and I needed money. I could understand that." While the kettle was boiling, she took the cream and began to apply it to her face. "Is this something the hospital recommended?" She shook her head, muttering something quietly. "I didn't hear. What did you say?" She straightened up and raised her shoulders. "I didn't go to the hospital." I exploded. "For goodness sake, Lily. Why?" Tears flowed down in large drops down the cream on her cheeks. "I was sure it was you," she said. "I was absolutely sure that you arranged this. And if I went to the hospital, the police would start an investigation, and they would come to arrest you. And I didn't want you to have problems. I've already caused you enough pain. It wasn't enough to add more to it." The words escaped her lips as she spoke. I was shocked. She only accepted the pain and destruction of her face because she thought it would keep me out of trouble with the police. To say that I was stunned and amazed is to say nothing. "Lily, even if I did it, you should have gone to the hospital. You needed help. Whoever organized the attack deserves punishment. If you went to the hospital, the police would have a chance to find the culprit." I tried to emphasize my denial. "Lily, it wasn't me. I would never do this to you." She looked into my eyes as if trying to read my thoughts and finally nodded, accepting my words. "What exactly happened? How did you cope if you didn't call an ambulance?" "It was on Monday. I was getting ready for work when the doorbell rang. I opened it. On the threshold stood a skinny man, tall but very thin. He asked if I was Mrs. Martin. I answered yes, and he said, 'This is revenge.' It seems he had a glass bottle in his hand. He ran away. I think I instinctively closed my eyes. I groped my way to the bathroom, found a rag to wipe my face, but then I remembered that I needed to dilute it with water. I got into the shower and turned on the cold water. I think I stood there for about an hour. I was soaked through. All my clothes and hair were wet. I was frozen to the bone, but my face still burned. I opened my eyes and looked in the mirror. I realized that I would never be beautiful again. The memories and retelling brought a new flood of tears from her. I couldn't do anything but hug her. She took my handkerchief again to wipe away my tears. My head was in chaos, but suddenly, out of these chaotic thoughts, an unexpected glimpse was born. Bennington. Lily turned from the kettle. "What's wrong with him?" "He did it." "Why do you think so?" "Let's sit down. I need to tell you a story." She told me to sit in the only chair, and she pulled a chair out from behind the table. I explained to her all about Bennington, Haskins, and Wello, how I had decided to take revenge, and as I did so, I realized that Lily's initial reaction was both right and wrong. It was truly my actions that set off the chain of events that led to her injury. If I had not taken revenge on Bennington, Lily would not have had to endure this terrible attack. What I did ruined Bennington's life. He'll probably go to jail, and I let him know that it was her husband who did this to him. I needed him to know. Perhaps he decided to hit back, and you became the victim. Lily, I'm so sorry. I didn't think this could affect you in any way." "I don't see it that way, Chad. I'm glad you got your revenge. If it was Bennington, then what happened to me was simply an unintended consequence. You take it so easily." Lily smiled bitterly. "It doesn't matter anymore." She pointed to her face. "It happened, and nothing will ever make me the same again. I made a decision some time ago. She was willing to endure it all alone just to protect me from what she considered arrest and punishment. That said a lot. Whatever she did, she redeemed herself. In my opinion, much more than could be expected. She accepted her disfigurement to protect me from imaginary punishment. I owed Lily my life. Cautiously, I asked, Lily, will you come home? Call it compassion, empathy, guilt, whatever. It's still love. I told you I couldn't stop loving you, and I haven't. I wanted you to suffer like I suffered. I wanted you to feel the pain that I went through. But for nothing in the world, I would not wish you the pain that you suffered. We'll find a good plastic surgeon and see what we can do. But please, Lily, come home. I want to take care of you. She shook her head. No, Chad, I can't do this. She raised her hand to stop me before I could say anything. Let me say this right away. Chad, I loved you then, and I love you now. I would be over the moon if we could be together again like before. But that won't happen. I hurt you too much. It wasn't intentional, but I still ruined something important. I can't just go back as if nothing happened. You will look at me and see this face. Remember why it is like that. Then your anger will return. This is what we need to talk about, I said. We both need to understand. I talked to Mrs. Dax, and she told me something that makes me think I didn't know the whole story. Mrs. Dax? She asked in surprise. Yes, you could say that I now know her and Lieutenant General Stanley. After all, I intervened in their affairs to get rid of Bennington, and now they consider me something of a business advisor. What did she say? It turned out that Bennington was a serial seducer. You, Lily, were one of many. Only after his dismissal did people start talking about it. I imagine he was very skilled with words and had a knack for telling stories that were gripping. Yes, that's right. Lily nodded. He invited me to lunch, saying that he sometimes arranges such meetings with all the employees. He said the company was in trouble. I felt like he shouldn't have shared this with me. He then added that he had a chance to attract a new client who could provide us with constant orders for months, even years. If it receives this contract, the planned staff reductions will not be necessary. He said that I could help him. I wanted to help. The only thing that seemed strange to me was that he always insisted that we drive my car. That's right, I noted. Flatter by saying that he needs your help, and then manipulate with guilt if you fail. You will allegedly be to blame for the dismissal of your colleagues. And the car. I'm sure his Jaguar was too recognizable, and if he drove a beautiful young woman around the city, it would quickly spread. When you explain it like that, it seems quite logical, she said, looking at me with uncertainty, as if checking whether she had used the right word. This small gesture touched me deeply. Tell me, Chad, since you know his methods so well, are you a serial seducer yourself? Her little smile brought back memories of those days when her smile was what gave my life meaning. No, Lily. The only girl I ever wanted to seduce is you. I smiled. You seemed to know what he was doing. She shook her head. You were the only man I wanted to seduce me. Her smile was sad. But if the answer to your question is no, then I didn't understand anything. He said he was going to host a dinner for 2 company representatives and asked me to act as hostess, prepare drinks, and be nice to them. Well, it was a secretary job, and I was in a position that entailed that. Only everything happened not in the office, but in the hotel. I don't know if he had a premeditated plan. I've had enough time to think about everything, but I still don't understand how I could be so stupid. I needed to ask a difficult question. In the recording, she looked like she was taking the initiative herself. Sorry for asking, but in the recording you look quite happy at that moment. I think I was like that, she admitted. Negotiations with Mr. Haskins and Mr. Wellow went well, although I cannot say that I understood everything. It seemed that we were about to sign a contract. I felt happy, very happy even, perhaps a little flirtatious. They were very polite and constantly complimented me, saying that my smile made their day. Women react to this. I don't know where the idea to take off my clothes came from. I think I did this to show them that I liked their attitude and wanted to make them happy. I didn't think they would take this as a signal that I was ready for sex. How stupid is this, right? Women know that if they undress in front of a man, it turns him on. But I didn't even have such thoughts. I think he planned everything. I was told that he used the substances many times. Most likely, he slipped something into your drink. Perhaps your happiness, lack of restraint, and confusion in your head were caused by this. No, Chad, I made the drinks myself. That's why I was there. Not all drinks, Lily. After lunch, he poured it himself. I don't remember that, Chad. It was on the recording. He poured this time. You are sure? Absolutely. I don't remember this. Her eyes opened wide, as if realizing something important. Bastard, she suddenly shouted. In all the time I knew her, I never heard her swear. Her sudden scream shocked me. I realized how deeply she understood deception and betrayal. That explains a lot, I continued. I would like to clarify one more point. Were there other times when you went into the room with him? No. She shook her head confidently. I think he was planning to do it again, but one of the girls told me that a few weeks before that Friday he made a reservation. However, I was unable to go because I was replacing the secretary, who felt ill that day. God, how I wish someone else had been sick that Friday. Her tone was calm, as if she was simply describing another event. I had no doubt that she was telling the truth. Memories of this day brought a new wave of tears from her. I went over again to console her. She cursed under her breath, calling Bennington every possible insult. I didn't interrupt her. Her awareness of how cruelly he had manipulated her only added to her pain. Suddenly, her arms wrapped around me. Oh, Chad, I'm so sorry. She took my handkerchief again to wipe away my tears. I lifted her face and kissed her gently. Her lips were now thin, almost unrecognizable, but they were still the same lips of Lily. She looked shocked. How can you do this? I'm ugly and disfigured. You're still the same Lily I fell in love with, I said softly. Yes, you were beautiful, but I fell in love with your soul, with the person you were, and not with your face. You are still that person. This man is beautiful, and I still love him. Tears continued to flow down her cheeks, but now a smile appeared on her face. Can I change my mind? She whispered. Can I go home, Chad? I want you to come home, I answered with confidence. Lily didn't take all her things when I made her leave. Her closet remained the way she left it. Her expression was amazing as she opened her closet and ran her hand through her dresses and suits. She pulled out one dress and one suit, throwing them on the floor with obvious annoyance. Throw these away, she said decisively. I wanted to throw them out myself, but I couldn't bring myself to open her closet. It would be like opening a box of sorrows. She neatly arranged her toiletries in the bathroom, noting, I'm unlikely to need these things, but I'm glad to see them back on the shelf. She suddenly stopped as she left the bathroom. Chad, would you rather I sleep in the guest room? No, I answered firmly. I want you to return to where you belong, in our bedroom, next to me. This is not an interim solution. We will either succeed together or fail together. But I don't expect failure. As for your makeup, I'm glad it's back on the shelf. I've had too much empty space there these past months. We'll find a good plastic surgeon, and who knows, you might need cosmetics again. There was not a single takeaway in Abbess Roding, not even the British necessity of the ubiquitous fish and chips. When I got home with Lily, it was already quite late, so I went to the pub and asked the owner, Bernard, to cook a couple of drinks for us. I dined there often during the months that Lily was away, and he readily agreed. We sat down to dinner together for the first time in 18 months. Lily was very nervous, but we enjoyed our meal. After dinner, she washed the dishes in the sink, dipping her hands in hot, soapy water, and hummed quietly to herself. She then dried them off, packing them back into the bag Bernard lent me. For a while, she began to wander around the house, touching chairs, tables, trinkets. I watched with warmth as she reaccustomed to these familiar things, realizing that I was right when I asked her to come home. The bed was prepared somehow strangely. We were both indecisive, finding some small things to do to delay the moment, fearing that the spark that was between us had faded during these 18 months of separation. But when we finally lay down, I turned to Lily, and she fell into my arms so naturally that all the time apart became unimportant. The high emotions we experienced that day exhausted our bodies, and we were both tired. Making love was not a priority. It was important to become a couple again, and close embrace was one of the ways to achieve this. Holding Lily in my arms in the warmth of our bed turned out to be one of the happiest moments of my life. It was a mixture of pleasure, satisfaction, and joy rolled into one feeling. Lily sighed heavily. 6 hours ago, I would have said that I would never be able to enjoy the hugs of my husband again. And now I'm here, and he's hugging me like before. 6 hours and my life completely changed. Thank you, Chad. Thank you for being strong enough to forgive me. Thank you for loving me enough to ignore my ugly face. And thank you for simply being my strength and support. I moved a little and kissed her on the lips, while tears flowed down her cheeks. I licked them. These are tears of happiness, Chad, my dear man. Happiness. I put work aside for a few days so that Lily and I could get used to living together again. I didn't change much in the house. I moved a few knickknacks and removed photographs that made me feel too strongly. Gradually and unobtrusively, Lily found them. She did not put them in their original places, but found new ones for them. Without words, she recognized that our old life was over and that we needed to build a new one together, and she helped in this. We didn't go into the village. Even with her hat and veil, Lily felt insecure because of the scars on her face. When I finally returned to work, I had a lot of messages on my answering machine. Frank called several times, and of course I called him back first. At first, he spoke dryly, reproaching me for being unavailable when he wanted to talk to me. Then his tone changed. "I see Lily is back," he said. It shouldn't have surprised me that he knew about it. Frank always found ways to keep an eye on those he considered useful to him. "Yes," I answered. "So you're still human, Jess. Glad to know. Welcome to the real world. I heard she had an accident." "I wouldn't call it an accident." "Why? What's happened?" I smiled inwardly, realizing that Frank's information channel was not working as well as he thought. Some bastard mutilated her face. Crap. He fell silent for a while. Frank saw the photograph of Lily that stood in my office and often said that he did not understand how I managed to get such a beautiful woman. "Who did this?" he finally asked. "Don't know. Lily only said that he was a tall, thin guy. Although I have guessed who could have organized this. The skinny guy is Harry Splash, the only vile creature capable of this. I'll talk to him and find out. When you find out, let me know." "No, Jess, your methods won't work here. You will not be able to bear the measures that will be required in this case. People think you're on my team, and I have to remain respectful. I cannot allow anyone to think that they can do this to my friends and get away with it." Frank never mentioned the incident again, but I knew that he had not forgotten him. Lily's return home soon became commonplace. At my suggestion, she began taking me to the station in the morning and picking me up in the evening. I did this so she could use the car during the day, but other than shopping, she didn't go anywhere. Mrs. Solby came only once a week now because Lily insisted on taking care of the house herself. I think Mrs. Solby was surprised to see Lily, but I gather she was glad to see her back. She was a talkative lady and loved to tell everyone the news of the village, but as far as I know, she never talked about Lily's face. Of course, given that the village was small, most of its inhabitants already knew everything. Residents knew how to pass on gossip very quickly. Lily did not show her face, but, gaining confidence, she went to the village store a couple of times without a veil. It seems that, to those who asked, she answered that she had been burned by hot oil while cooking. We have already restored physical intimacy. One wonderful night when we made love. There was only love between us. Lily always liked to talk after intimacy. However, she loved to talk at any time. As we lay there recovering our strength, I expected her to say something. But to my surprise, she was silent. Jokingly, I asked if she was speechless. "No, Chad. I just don't have words. It was like the first time in Tenerife. Do you remember? Then I also couldn't find words. How can I forget this? You came to me and gave me not only your body, but also all of yourself. It was the most precious gift I have ever been given." Her arms tightened around my body, and so she silently acknowledged my words of love. "You gave yourself to me too, Chad." I couldn't believe that someone could give me so much pleasure. But you did it. Tonight I felt like we were on another honeymoon again. In a way it is, Lily. We chose a cosmetic surgeon, James Waterman. Of course, he consulted in Harley Street, and his services were not cheap. However, he was honest. The burned tissue could be improved with skin grafts, and he could restore Lily's eyelids and lips. But he warned that he would not be able to return his face to its previous state. He also asked why Lily did not seek medical help immediately after the incident. I explained that we were separated at the time, and Lily mistakenly believed that I was involved in this, so she did not seek help so as not to be held accountable. He was stunned by this. "Your wife must love you very much, Mr. Martin," he said. Lily replied, "Yes, Mr. Waterman, I do." In the car, we discussed the consultation. I was disappointed, but Lily took everything with a grain of pragmatism. "Chad, if he can't get my face back to how it looked before, it still makes sense. I will be able to look in the mirror and see myself as I am and remember why I became that way. My face in the mirror will be a daily reminder to me that I cannot trust lying scoundrels. I belong only to you." She was silent for a moment and then continued. "Although it would be nice if I could close my eyes completely. They cry so often." I understood her logic, although it still hurt me that Lily would never be the same as she used to be. The cosmetic surgery took about 3 months. Lily was pleased with the results. Although the changes were significant, Mr. Waterman was right. Even with skin grafts, Lily's face still looked a little plastic, like after a stroke or stroke. She had to live with this for the rest of her days. Lily didn't know anything about my job other than the fact that I was an accountant. I thought she should know a little about it. One weekend we sat down and I told her what I do and for whom and where my client's money comes from. Her reaction surprised me. She laughed. "Did I say something funny?" "No, Chad. I just tried to make you look like a gangster." "So how?" "It didn't work out. Please don't be offended, but you are the last person anyone would suspect of dishonesty." I smiled. "Great. This is exactly the impression I want to make." We talked about my retirement plan. She was delighted. "Where are we going to go?" she asked. I was thinking about Spain or Cyprus. "They might start looking for you, right?" I shrugged. "This is only possible if I am careless, but I will continue to be careful, and in a few years we will be able to put all this behind us." She thought, looking around our house. "It will be a pity to leave this place. I love this house and this area so much." I thought about this too. The Ruthin area was a wonderful place to live. "Well, we can just buy a villa and spend the winters abroad," I suggested. Her face brightened. "Is it true? Can we do that? If that's what you want, we can start looking now." "How about a holiday in the sun?" "I wish I could. I'll buy myself a little bikini, sunbathe, or maybe sunbathe topless. And if you're very good, I'll take off the bottom part too when we're alone." She laughed slyly. "Then you can do whatever you want with me. Often, I hope." I thought that a vacation should be organized as soon as possible. The pleasures that Lily offered were too tempting to wait for long. I realized that many men would not take back an unfaithful wife and would still expect her to forgive them for their own infidelities. It's their choice. I made another one. Lily was stupid and got into a situation she couldn't control. Since Terry Ducks mentioned this, I've read enough about so-called illicit dating substances to know that they affect people differently. Bennington was smart. He knew how to manipulate his victim, and he chose the right moment to give her the drug. He ended up paying for it. Haskins and Wello paid too, and I paid for his actions. But Lily paid the most. There comes a time when ego and pride must be put aside and decisions must be made based on compassion, humanity, and love. Of course, not in all cases, since each situation is unique. My wife will live with the physical and psychological consequences of her fall for the rest of her life. Some will say, if you cheat once, you will always cheat. But like all proverbs, this is not the ultimate truth. One evening on the BBC News, I saw a story about a certain Harold Attingham, whose body was found in the Thames by the river police. 2 months later, there was news again that reminded me of the conversation with Frank. It was reported that an inmate was attacked at Sudbury Open Prison. The victim was one Wa Bennington. The East London tradition continued. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.